Hi Bodcasters, Raging Rich and I are taking a short winter break and we'll be back with you on the 4th of February with Season 3 of the Middle-aged Bodcast, Bodcast Boot Camp, where we're going to be back bigger and better than ever. Well, hopefully we won't be remaining as big as ever, but that remains to be seen. So in the meantime, we're revisiting some of our great episodes from Season 1. And today we are going back to our first ever guest episode with Laura, where she talked about mental health. Thanks very much to Laura, and we will see you soon.
Oh, it's the Middle-aged Bodcast. Getting old, ever having a blast with Rich and T.A. You're never alone on this journey to feel better in mind, body, and soul. Turn it up and tune in, they're here to say the middle-aged life's not just okay. It's freaking great.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Middle-aged Bodcast with me, Raging Rich.
And me, T.A. Shelano.
And T.A., we have a special guest with us today.
We do. Laura has kindly agreed to come and do a special mental health episode with us. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So T.A., I suppose we should kick off as we do with our weekly weigh-in, just to give us a little bit of an update on that.
Yeah, bear with us, Laura, while we normally it's just me and him doing this, so we'll get to your
No
important bit
judgment,
shortly.
no
And
judgment.
please no judgments. We won't show you the real figures. That's coming at the end of the season. So, drum roll please. T.A. Shelano is a non-mover this week, so I have neither put on nor lost weight. So that's, I suppose, good and bad in equal measure. More work to do for next week. And now, Raging Rich's figures. Raging Rich has lost 4 pounds this week. Well done there. Well done there, Rich. I don't know what you've been doing there, but you obviously had a much better week than me at this game.
Well, I've had the week off work, so I did have a few days where I could just jump on the exercise bike without having to worry about getting off to work and having to get on public transport and spend all my time travelling. So it's been quite useful to be at home and actually do a little bit of exercise and make a bit of progress. And I did also make myself a curry in the slow cooker, which was quite a good thing as well. So.
Well, that's excellent. So hopefully we'll keep that up then next week, and I'll have a better week, and you will carry on in the same vein as the challenge between us continues. But now, I suppose we should go over to our special guest, Laura, who is going to talk to us about mental health. Just before we get going with the interview with Laura, I must put out a disclaimer that obviously none of us are professionals in the field of mental health, and today is just people talking about their experiences. If you are genuinely struggling, then we would obviously recommend that you seek appropriate medical support and advice. Thank you.
Laura, thank you for joining us here on the Middle-aged Bodcast today. We're really grateful to have you here. Could we start off with you just telling us a little bit about some of your experiences with mental health?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think my mental health journey, I'd say, started when I was about 15, 16, back in 1999, 2000, where mental health really wasn't spoken about that much, and there was still quite a lot of stigma around it. I was diagnosed with depression. And I'm still dealing with it now. I'm currently on antidepressants, which I've been on for about 20 years, I would say. And I'm also having private therapy sessions that keeps my mood balanced. I still have low points, but generally it's really helpful, and I found it really useful just to keep me going with everyday life.
How have you found the therapy experience?
Incredible. It's a specific type of therapy that I was recommended having, called psychodynamic therapy. Unfortunately, it's not available on the NHS because it's very specialised. And I was always quite dubious about speaking to a therapist because I'd had counsellors in the past who were, again, good for my everyday work, but actually not getting to the root of the problem. And for those counsellors as well, I had to pay private. And I was dubious about coming back into therapy just because it's a lot of money, and my previous experiences, I just wasn't getting any solutions. But I've now been seeing a therapist for about a year and a half, and it's definitely made an impact, even to the point where I have a lot of friends who have noticed that change in me.
Is there a point with the therapy where you think you would get to not taking medication anymore, or do you very much see that as a joining together?
That's the goal. Like the overall goal is to get to a point where I can manage my own mood without having to take medication to balance it out, particularly when you do become dependent on that medication, and if you don't take it you feel quite ill, and you don't want to have to go through that forever. But yeah, that is the goal, and I do see it happening. You have to feel positive about it and the future. That is my aim.
So outside of the therapy sessions, what helps you with your mental health?
A lot of it is being around friends. I think part of my depression is the feeling of loneliness and isolation. So just being around friends, not necessarily physically, having that communication over the phone or just text messages and things like that. Exercise really helps as well. I do hot yoga, which is really good for mental health and breathing and awareness to your body. But it also helps me to feel stronger, and also vanity purposes, like you do look better when you've been exercising. So yeah, I think a lot of that really helps me outside of therapy.
You mentioned there obviously loneliness, and I note that a lot of people talk about that as an increasing problem and impact on mental health, which is interesting considering obviously the world sort of population is very high now, but the loneliness seems to be getting worse. What thoughts do you have around modern society on loneliness?
I think a lot of it is that you just don't feel part of a community. So I lived in a city in an apartment. Very rarely did I speak to my neighbours, but the times I've spent overseas, you actually feel part of a community and you feel a lot less lonely. Everybody's just so busy with their everyday lives that you can just be very isolated, and sometimes you're that person that just needs to reach out to have some of that contact, particularly if you live alone. And I'm lucky that I do have people that I can reach out to, but other people don't. And I think that's why being lonely or feeling lonely is not the same as being alone. They are two different things, and I think you're very much feelings of loneliness is more about isolation and nobody understanding what you're going through, particularly if you're also going through mental health issues.
So what impact has the media and more recently social media had on your mental health?
I try not to engage very much with social media. I have Instagram so I can follow like Manchester United and things like that. But again, I think it's just about what kind of depression you have or the cause of your depression. And a lot of it for me is that external appearance that I have issues with. And obviously social media is full of fake imagery, unrealistic expectations of what a woman should look like. And particularly as I'm getting older, now I'm 40, I do concern myself with not trying to put forward those unrealistic expectations. And the media as well, like it's full of women who are 50s, 60s that don't look that age because they've got the money to actually do something about it. And whereas I think men are allowed to age, I don't think women are, and the media and social media is hugely to blame for that. But then, there is the positive side of social media that when I see a fitness reel or I follow some people on Instagram that inspire my fitness journey and yoga, I I take inspiration from that. I don't look at my body and think, oh, I'm not as good as that person. It actually motivates me and gives me something to aim for. So I think social media is very much a double-edged sword.
I mean, on that point, obviously, in terms of us all here on the sort of Middle-aged Bodcast, I guess sort of the emergence of technology came more for us as sort of, I guess, mid to late teens.
Yeah.
So the experience that actually a lot of young people are having today wasn't around then. How do you feel, in terms of that impact on young people?
I can't even imagine like what young people would be going through. There's a part of me, my depression started when I was bullied at school for how I looked, and at least back in those days I could go home and almost shut myself away from it, but you can't nowadays because it's online. And I truly believe that I don't think if I'd have grown up in a social media age that I would actually be alive today. I just don't think I could have coped.
Wow, I mean that's quite quite an interesting take on that, and there have been some really, really appalling stories. I think we will all have seen it in the media where that has happened to young people as well, and how awful that is. And on that point, I think I've read quite recently there's some talk now around potentially the sort of banning smartphones in schools, trying to bring in better regulation for how under 18s engage, obviously, with the internet. And I've heard it compared to kind of like how society used to treat smoking, for example. What was your view on how society should move forward with the technology?
I think when you're in a community setting like a school and you're learning and it's all person to person, there shouldn't be the need for telephones or anything like that. Your communication with your peers should be talking face to face. And I completely agree with banning phones from school or banning the use of social media. Because like everything, it can be used for negative purposes. And I think kids nowadays, they don't really know how to communicate just face to face. It's either online or they're texting each other, but they're actually just sat across the table from each other. So yeah, I agree that I think moving forward it should be encouraged when you're in a communal setting that you don't need the use of other social media platforms to actually have conversations.
I think you've obviously mentioned about social media not being available in schools and phones. It's certainly for us, phones weren't available then. You had to sort of just, if something happened that was an emergency, for example, the school would phone your parents, for example, on the landline, exactly. and you sort of think, well, that's surely still now something that can be done. If there's an emergency with a pupil at school or a student in college or university or anything like that, there's still a way to contact people that need to be contacted if something's happened. Contacting the institution itself is something that if something had to happen the other way, so it was actually a parent or guardian who had to get in touch about something. And you just find that it seems with the advancements in technology, we've actually found, because it's so convenient to us, people have forgotten how it used to be, and actually a lot of that could still be done. And maybe that's something that should be looked at with social media, because certainly I think it's not good that people are still exposed to it, and certainly the contact. You mentioned, Laura, as well, with social media and people not talking face to face. We've seen a lot in the media where we've seen celebrities getting abuse on social media, and also regular people getting abuse on social media. There's that kind of anonymity that people have where they're using a Twitter or a Facebook account and it's not got their name or their picture on it and things like that. How do you feel that's kind of changed in society as well? Because it does feel like people think they have more freedom to just say what they want, but they don't actually think of the repercussions of things. And I'm kind of thinking about back to such as Caroline Flack, for example, and how she was treated, and then how after everything that happened, obviously the media certainly were very different. They'd been going all in on her at the start, and then after she sadly passed away, everything changed, and it was this be kind narrative, which is exactly what should be the case all the way. How do you feel sort of that anonymity has sort of led to people on social media and their behaviours, and how it could affect people without them actually knowing what effect they're having on the people they're giving abuse to.
I think the fact that there has to be a campaign called Be Kind, like, we should know that anyway. We're all people. We shouldn't have to be told to be kind to each other. And I think that, like you say, with social media, you know, it does give people the freedom to say what they want to say, but they would never say that publicly to someone's face. And I think it's just a cowardly way of being insulting. And they probably don't even believe in something that they're saying. They're just doing it to be controversial, to potentially get attention. And they might be mean-spirited people or not very nice. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to swear. But I think for them themselves, why are they wanting that attention? Why are they wanting that negative attention and using social media to get it? Again, I think it comes from the loneliness that social media can bring you, the lack of communication, the lack of physical communication of being around people. But it just shows that having to tell people to be kind to each other, it's, you know, that's the type of society that we are dealing with in certain elements. Like, it's not all of society, but it's certain elements of society. And that has a massive negative impact on people, particularly vulnerable people, people who are trying to deal with their own mental health and just getting through each day. And those are the people that we really need to look out for and look after.
I think it's interesting as well in terms of, I've read a lot recently around the impact on mental health, particularly in Western society, where perhaps some of those things that you talk about, where the ideals of how people look are perhaps not so much in developing nations, and they perhaps don't have that level of integration with sort of social media, etc. And it's sort of found that mental health problems there are potentially lower. So it's kind of interesting. There's almost this, I'm trying to think of the right phrase, but this almost impact of sort of talk about like developed nations versus developing nations, and then in nations that are perceived as poorer sort of economically, but actually then they are richer culturally in terms of the communities that you talked about and people talking to each other, and less of those negative impacts. So I mean, is that something that you consider? How do you feel? You mentioned going abroad, for example, to you know, other countries and seeing that. Do you feel if you'd all grown up in another country, or you know, not in perhaps in too much of a Western society, what a difference that may or may not have made to you?
Yeah, I do. I have thought it when I've been away. I think the Western culture is very consumer driven. Everywhere you look, you're being somebody's trying to sell you something, and you're almost never left to be content with what you've got. It's always, you need bigger, faster, more beautiful. You know, there's no, okay, look at what you've got a roof over your head, you've got food on the table, you've got family and friends around you, that should be enough. But it's almost, you're told that it's not. You need a faster car or a bigger TV. Whereas in the communities that I've lived overseas, these people are aware that there is societies out there and they have more than they have, but they're allowed to be content with what they've got. They don't have like the best drainage system, but they have food on their table. It's not a massive choice of food, but they have enough to be healthy, to grow. And I think Western society, it's almost like, yeah, you're not allowed to stop still and be, okay, I'm in a really good place at the moment, rather than, oh, I'm alone, I don't have a partner, I don't have kids, my job isn't paying me loads of money, like I only have a 2-bed house, I have like 5-year-old car, but I need more. And I'm like, well, that should be enough for somebody. But yeah, it's almost like we're not allowed.
Is the 24/7 culture of the modern era incompatible with humans?
Oh, what a question. I think if you look at it worldwide, probably not, because when somebody is awake in one country, there's other people asleep on the other side of the world. So yeah, the 24-hour culture, it has to be there to service other people. I think as a person, I don't think it is compatible. Like, we need sleep, we need to cut off. I don't think our brains can take 24-hour stimulation. And I'm very mindful, like when I go to bed, I don't have a TV in my bedroom. I don't take my tablet with me. It's very much, I have my phone in case something happens, but I very much read books. I don't need that information. And I think once you get into that habit, you're in that habit then. And it might also become more of an addiction. But no, I think just as a human being, we don't need that 24-hour stimulation.
So is part of the problem now then the way that the technology and everything has kind of advanced, particularly in, say, the last quarter of a century, it's almost outpacing then human ability in some respects, and how we're then neglecting the need for rest, sleep, etc., and that the lines are becoming blurred, and that people are then losing from a younger and younger age that opportunity to actually have more beneficial breaks, rest, mental health, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think computers and technology are massively outpacing humans. Like, the way an algorithm can run in just a second, where a person's brain doesn't compute anything in that amount of time. I feel like sometimes we forget that we're just human, that we need that break, we need to switch off. And I think during COVID that, we were able to maybe just shut off for a little bit. We got better at appreciating nature, just appreciating the world around us rather than the online world. But I think now we're a few years after COVID, I think we're starting to lose that again. And it's really important to bring nature and the world and just being natural. I think technology is not natural. I think we need to remember that we are part of the natural world, and we need to keep an emphasis on that.
What do you think then we can do to promote that, in terms of as a society or the machinery of government? What can we do to help people?
I think we need to make the natural world more accessible. I think it's quite easy if you were brought up in the countryside, if you have access to green spaces. But again, during COVID, there were people stuck in like 15-floor flats that don't have any green space around them. Like, I was in the city during COVID in lockdown, and I had no green space that I could go and visit. So I think we need to make it more accessible. And also, I'm not completely anti-technology. I think what needs promoting is the balance. Like, you can't just have all of one and none of the other. There has to be a balance between the two. Appreciate technology for what it can do, but let's not forget what is just outside, and all we have to do to see it is look up from our phones.
I think we're in a particularly interesting moment at the moment, because here we are doing something through a technological format. I think we have to acknowledge that. But yet, strangely, we're sat here with no phones, and we are just in the moment of a conversation here, which is quite interesting. So in one sense, we're using it, but in another, if we weren't doing this, the potentially we could be sat here looking at our phones and not properly engaging, which is something else that I've noticed is become more and more of a problem, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody sometimes, is that being attention to being present, whether it's in conversations with people in person, and or when you're just in, like you say, nature or whatever, of just taking in the natural world without that need.
And you can listen to this while sat in a park with your earphones in, but just looking up at the sky. That's the balance. Again, it's not about shutting out one thing for another. It's just allowing both to come through. And that's, I think, as humans, we need that mix. We can't just have 100% of one thing. And also with technology, sometimes I feel that humans have a misconception that we can control it, and we can't.
Well, that's a more dangerous conversation of Terminator 2 Judgment Day and the augmentation of artificial intelligence.
It's an interesting thing, though, you say about controlling technology, because last year I actually had to seek some help for my mental health due to some pressures at work, and it was actually related to a lot of issues with the technology that we were working with, and me being kind of a single point of failure for a lot of things. And you do notice, you know, you sort of forget that you should be taking a bit more time for yourself. You should be, like you say, spending time, you know, finding green space, finding time to take time out, and it is sometimes really hard for people to do. You mentioned that you do hot yoga and sort of things like that that have really helped you. How did you find out about that? How did you find things that kind of gave you that chance to sort of focus on yourself and find that balance?
I think it's just taking the opportunity. I tried lots of different things, and it seemed that hot yoga was the one thing that stuck. And it's not for everybody, you know. It's my personality that I like being around in nature. I like yoga. I like exercising where I don't have to wear trainers, because I just feel a lot more grounded. And my mental health needs that. And I'm certainly not saying that that's the answer for everybody. I just would encourage people to just try different things and see what sticks for them, you know, and you will find it. You've just got to keep trying. Say yes to opportunities that you're presented with friends, even if you don't feel like it's for you. Just give it a go and see.
I think that's an interesting point as well when we talk about time and different things, is the amount of time that people are actually spending on smartphones, I think, is another thing that's been brought out. And then very often we're all guilty of saying that we don't have enough time to do things. But I think that is another key point, isn't it? Is making the time to do things that are positive, when potentially we're obviously losing so much time doing something that actually isn't constructive or helping us as well.
Yeah, and I was like that. I would like look at different apps and gossip columns and things like that, and I just thought I need to be doing something a bit more productive with my time on my phone. So I started learning Spanish through an app, and it's just a little bit of time a day that I sit with my phone instead of scrolling through all the social media apps, making myself feel bad. You know, I just learn a little bit as I go.
Do you want to say something to our listeners in Spain?
Oh gosh. Hola. That's what a year of learning Spanish has done for me.
Muy bien, gracias, Laura.
Just wondering how you feel that society considers physical health problems versus mental health problems?
Well, I do think society prioritises physical health problems. And I get, in a sense, that you can see for yourself what's wrong. Like if somebody's broken their leg, you can clearly see that the leg's broken. Whereas I think mental health it's a lot harder to understand, particularly if you haven't gone through it yourself. But then there are instances when I've gone through, like, I call them episodes of depression, where friends of mine have said that they can physically see the depression, and that's something that they've never been able to do before, even to the point where they've seen pictures of me and I look different. Like, it's still me, but at that particular time when I had that picture taken of me when I was in a depressive episode, I come across differently. So I can understand it, but just because somebody can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And for that person who's going through it, it is very real. And again, like I say, I've had particular episodes, but because I'm not in an episode, which for me is completely debilitating, doesn't mean that depression's not there. I'm being treated for depression, and I fight my depression every day. But because it's not physically apparent to everybody around me, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that that's not an internal struggle that I'm having. And I think it's just being mindful to people, particularly if you've got friends who you know being treated for depression. Just be mindful.
Can you give examples of where, you know, your mental health has led to you sort of being mistreated or misunderstood at all?
I think constantly by friends, family, not through any malicious intent. It's just people just take at face value what they see. So if I'm irritable, for me, I like to sleep. If I'm going through a particularly low period, I just want to sleep. And, you know, people will make comments if I get into work a bit later, like, oh, you're late for work, or, you know, and I want to say to them, well, actually, I'm feeling really low today and I just did not want to get out of bed. But you can't say that. You know, you have to keep that mask on. It's almost like you're protecting everybody else around you. If you're feeling particularly irritable and you're quite sharp with people, I mean, that's not a good thing, but it is a symptom, and you'll get somebody's back up and they'll argue with you. Sometimes there are bigger issues that person is dealing with, and it's not all, again, at face value. It's not a physical thing that you can see, and that's where the be kind is. But yeah, every day I get comments that I get into work late or I'm a late person, and it's just easier for me to say, oh, I'm more of an evening person, where actually I want to say I just really struggled to get out of bed this morning.
So Laura, just thinking about our listeners and some of the people that are listening that potentially are struggling with their mental health, and are looking for some advice on you know, what kind of things work obviously for you that maybe you think may help others. I know that it's different person to person, but are there any kind of things that you were given advice on maybe that helped you to find the things that worked for you, or anything like that?
I think, or just think about something that you've always wanted to do, whether it's like a class or a hobby, and just try it. I think you won't ever regret giving it a go if it doesn't work out, but you'll regret not trying it. And I think, you know, you are allowed to do things just because you enjoy it. There's no, you know, you don't have to do it because it's going to give you a medal or more money. If you enjoy something, then do it. And even if that's just spending time with friends, like, don't be afraid to send that message to your friends to be like, do you want to meet up? And know that people are there to help. I know we've talked a lot, it's been quite negative on society, I think, that we've talked about, but we're just talking about a very small portion of society, whereas actually there's so many people out there that just are kind, that don't need to be told to be kind, you know. And I think if you do something that you've always wanted to do, you meet those people and realise that the world's not the worst place in the world, but you can position yourself with really good people around you. But also, I just want to say quickly to friends of people who are dealing with mental health issues, it's really nice of you to say to them, message me if you know you need to chat or you're feeling low. I can pretty much guarantee you that they won't message you. What your friend needs is for you at some point to just send them a message to say, just thinking of you, are you okay? Because honestly, that's happened to me before, and it just means the world. It proves to you that you're not alone, they're not alone, and they don't have to ask for people to be there for them. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Okay, I think that's very sound advice. And again, I think we're probably concluding the interview with you, Laura. Obviously, very grateful for your time today, and really positive to have somebody come and speak on a topic that is often talked about, but not so much where we perhaps get to hear, you know, that story in more detail and in such a personal way. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I think just to go back to the disclaimer at the start, obviously, you know, this is a chat between obviously sort of three people here, and we are not professionals. And obviously, if you are out there listening to this and you are struggling, then we obviously recommend that you do seek the appropriate medical support and advice. But as Laura said, you know, reach out to people and don't suffer in silence. And now, Rich will test for our next episode coming up, which is the Midway Progress Report.
Yes, we have the Midway Progress Report coming up as our next episode, so that's going to be quite an interesting one, just to see where we are with the weekly weigh-in, and also just finding out the kind of things that we've been up to try and help ourselves through this journey. Just want to echo TA's statement there, and say thank you to Laura for being here today. It's been really good chatting with you, been a really eye-opening chat, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And as TA did mention, please, we are not medical professionals, so please do, if you are struggling, please reach out to people. Please reach out to anyone in the medical profession, or even if you're not comfortable doing that, speak to somebody you trust who can maybe help you to get the advice from the appropriate people. But yes, we will be back with the midpoint, the midway journey of the Middle-aged Bodcast in our next episode. Thank you everyone for listening, and if you do have anything that you are struggling with, we hope this episode's been a real help to you.
I think, Rich, should we leave the final word to our first ever interviewee guest on the podcast, Laura?
I'm honoured. I just want to say thank you to everybody for listening to me ramble on about mental health. I hope you've been able to take something away from it, or at least know that it's okay to discuss it with a group of friends around a table like we are today. So thank you again, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Two best mates, yeah, they take you to stand. Raging Rich and T.A, got your health in the hands. Weigh-ins, laughs and tales they tell. For beats and nights, the workouts, they're keeping it real. Oh, it's the middle-aged